So for task 4, we're going to use correlated subqueries, which are kind of like self-joins. So we're going to do task number 4. And the first one, our boss wants us to display supplier information for those suppliers who have products less than $20. And we're going to be using North Winds for this. We're going to select supplier ID, company name, and phone. That'll be from the supplier table. And we're going to be using the exists qualifier on this. So it's going to look at our subquery, product name, where the supplier ID is equal to the supplier ID. So this is where the self-join part comes in. And the unit price is less than 20. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and run it. Okay, so these are the suppliers with the more inexpensive products. So our boss wants to know which vendors and invoices have totals larger than the vendor's average invoice amount. So this requires retrieving vendor information and comparing each vendor invoice total to the average invoice total for that particular vendor. So you're comparing the vendor basically against themselves, which is where the self-join part comes in. So our outer query is going to look something like this, where we got the vendor ID, invoice number, and invoice total from invoices. And we're going to sort by vendor ID and total. Okay, so that's giving us the number and the total. And then the subquery part is going to average the invoice total. So this is going to have to be in a where clause. So in between from and order by, we are going to stick where. And we are comparing the invoice total to see if it is greater than a subquery, which we're going to create. And so the subquery is select average invoice total. Move this over. Okay, from invoices. And we're just going to give that a little alias here. And we want to make sure that the invoice vendor ID that we're comparing to is equal to the vendor ID that the outer query is looking at. So we've got this little inner query that's running, and we've got this outer query that's running. And they're both looking at vendor ID. So when the outer query vendor matches the inner query vendor, that is when we want to do this comparison. Okay? And basically, we're comparing the vendor against their own average. So we're going to go ahead and run this. Whoops, can't have it highlighted. And these are the totals that are larger than the average. Okay, for each vendor. So we're not looking at a total average for all vendors. They are being compared against themselves. So for vendor 34, this value is larger than the average. For vendor 37, they have a couple values larger than the average. A 110 also has a couple values larger than their own average. And we're going to go ahead and comment that out. And we're going to move on to task 5 in the next video.